Returning from my past existence, I made a conscious choice to dodge every chance of running into Leo Kim this time around. When he mentioned he wasn't heading back home for the holidays, I packed up my stuff and headed back to the village on my own. While he was busy helping Mia White secure a spot right next door, I decided to move out, and he opted to stay and hustle at the university. I threw my application into a school up in the Northwest. In my last life, even when I was older, my kids pushed me to split from him. They said it was so he and Mia could finally be together after death, like their tragic love story deserved. As I stared down at the acceptance letter in my hand, tears nearly spilled. Nobody knew I'd been reborn. At the very last second, I switched my university application to the Northwest Tech Institute. Even my teacher was caught off guard. "Weren't you saying your fiancé was staying at the university? How could he wait for you if you're moving so far away?" I grinned and shot back with a bright smile. "We're all about free love these days. And Childhood engagements are just leftovers from some old-school society, totally outdated." The teacher, seemingly impressed by my determination, gave my shoulder a approving pat. As I left school, I followed the crowd heading home. In my last life, I didn't even make it to college. My wedding to Leo was just days away. And soon after, I had a kid. That was the end of my education. Leo stayed at the university for a bit before joining the army. From there on, we led separate lives. He climbed the ranks, and wherever he went, Mia and her daughter tagged along. Meanwhile, I was stuck in a tiny corner of the world, taking care of his parents and raising our kids. I watched my children grow up, initially clinging to me, but eventually getting closer to their dad. One day, I even found out about Mia and her daughter's wedding to my son through a photo a friend sent after the ceremony had gone down. The picture showed Mia and Leo all smiles as they watched their daughter-in-law pour tea for them. My own son had begged me to ditch Leo more than once. "Mom, Dad's been through so much his whole life. If it weren't for you, he'd have been with my grandma long ago. You two just aren't a match. Why won't you let go? Even my daughter-in-law won't talk to me. What am I supposed to do? I wasn't ready to let go." I couldn't shake the sleepless nights spent caring for his paralyzed parents or sprinting barefoot through the night when our kid was sick, only to catch him hanging out with Mia and her daughter elsewhere. Everyone said we weren't meant to be. They all blamed me for not letting go. But when I looked in the mirror at my tired, aged face staring back, I couldn't help but feel rebellious. Even if it meant losing my life, I'd drag them all down with me. In the end, I passed away after another fight with my son about leaving Leo. A heart attack hit me as he stormed out, slamming the door without a second glance. I called after him, but he didn't turn around. In that moment, I regretted everything. Why did I bring him into my life? Why did I waste my years like this? But now, I've been given a second shot. I'm back to before I married Leo, and everything can change. When I got home, I tucked away my acceptance letter and started cooking. The two-bedroom apartment was one of Leo's perks from work. While the food simmered, I circled the date on the calendar for my university start day with a red pen, staring intently at the marked date. Hope filled my heart. Soon, very soon, I'd be free. When dinner was ready, Leo came home as usual with Mia and her child in tow. "Sorry to bug you again," Mia said, flashing a sweet smile in her bright red coat, her pale skin glowing. The little girl, clearly used to the routine, eagerly rushed to serve the food. One bowl for herself, one for Leo, one for Mia, and none for me. When I stepped out of the kitchen, the three of them were chatting happily, like a picture-perfect fam. But the second they tasted the food, they spat it out. "Mommy, it's so salty," the kid exclaimed, leaning against the doorframe. I watched Leo scramble to pour soup for them, only to realize it was saltier than the dish. In tears, Mia whispered, "Looks like your wife isn't welcoming me here. I'll stop coming over." Leo walked her to the door. When he came back, he gave me a frown. I ignored him and went back to the kitchen to whip up a fresh meal. "You did that on purpose," he said, sounding confused. "Mia's husband passed, and she asked me to look after her and her daughter. Your cooking is awesome, and the kid likes it." Before he could finish, I shut down with silence. After a beat, he sighed and said, "Fine. If you don't like it, I won't invite them over again." The next day, after Leo left for work, I started packing my bags. I planned to head back to the village soon since our families had exchanged tokens and birth dates for the engagement. I needed to officially break things off with witnesses to avoid future drama. As I packed, I stumbled upon the embroidered bedding I'd been working on secretly for years. I paused for a sec, grabbed a bag, and packed everything: embroidered pillowcases, new shoes I'd made, and other stuff. I headed to the pawn shop at the end of the street. The embroidery I'd spent years on sold for 30 bucks. It wasn't much, but at college, every penny counts for meals and necessities, so I set the money aside, ready to save it for later. Back home, I marked another big X on today's date in the calendar. Just 20 days left. In 20 days, I'd leave this place and start my new life. Leo came back late that night. The food I made was untouched. He ate at school. He offered some offhand excuse, but the faint scent of white tea perfume clinging to him said otherwise. He'd eaten, yeah, but probably with Mia and her daughter, knowing he'd piss me off by eating here. He chose to dine with them elsewhere before coming home. I quietly cleaned up the dishes and went back to my room. Inside were stacks of my high school books and notes, some spilling into the living room because of the lack of space. I tied up the books in my room with string, planning to sort the living room stuff after Leo left the next day. If I was leaving, none of my things should stay here. As I packed, I heard a knock on the door. I knew it was Leo. He was always polite, never entering my room without asking. "What's up?" I asked, not wanting him to see me packing. There was a moment of silence before he replied, "I was filing the marriage report." "Is the 9th of next month cool for the wedding date?" "The 9th of next month," I repeated. "The same day we got hitched in my past life." I glanced at my neatly packed stuff. "Marriage is a big deal," I said calmly. "I'll check with my family tomorrow before giving you an answer." Another pause. Then I heard his footsteps retreating down the hall. Relieved, I leaned against the bed. Technically, given Leo's current position, he didn't need family approval to file a marriage report. My parents were gone, and his family had taken me in because of our childhood engagement. To everyone else, I was already part of the Kim family. This marriage report was just a formality. After all, Leo was good-looking, capable, and nice to me. Anyone could see I'd fallen for him long ago. I owed the Kim family, but I had already spent a lifetime paying that debt. I didn't owe them anymore. This time, I'd walk my own path, a path without Leo Kim. The next morning, to my surprise, Leo had made breakfast, fried eggs and treasure porridge, my faves in our 3-year stint here. He rarely did this. I sat silently at the table, the clinking of utensils the only sound. "I'll take a leave of absence and go back with you," Leo suddenly said, breaking the silence. Startled, I instinctively shook my head. Silence. Startled. I shook my head again. "I'll drive you back. It's not safe for you to go alone," he said, frowning. I was about to say no when a little girl dashed through the door. "Godfather?" She had pink butterfly bows in her hair and dove straight into Leo's arms. "Nyan Nyan, why are you here? Where's your mom?" Leo asked, glancing toward the door. Nyan Nyan looked up at me hesitantly. "Mom said Auntie doesn't like her, so she didn't dare come." I stared silently at the little girl who, in my past life, married my son yet never once showed up in front of me. Though she was only 3, her beauty was already clear. No wonder my son, years her junior, had idolized her and her mom like they were gods. As expected, Leo quickly left with Nyan Nyan, saying Mia wasn't feeling well. Without another word to me, he rushed out the door with the kid. I chuckled bitterly. At least now I didn't have to come up with an excuse to leave on my own. I picked up a pen and marked another big X on today's date in the calendar. 19 days to go. I spent the day organizing the rest of my stuff, tying up my notebooks, textbooks, and exams. Once everything was sorted, I sold them for 13 bucks and headed back to the village. Today, I'd end the engagement between Leo and me. The Liang elders had always treated me well, but convincing them to cancel the engagement wouldn't be too hard. All I needed to do was tell them Leo's future was bright, and I wasn't a good match for him. The village courtyard was quiet, the air heavy and still. A bonfire crackled in the yard, mosquitoes buzzing in its heat. I pressed tobacco leaves under a wooden plank and finally sliced them with a hatchet. The elders sat silently on the doorstep. After a while, they sighed deeply and tried to reason with me. "Aru, even if he has someone else on his mind, you're engaged to him. If he doesn't marry, I'll sort him out myself. Your parents left you in our care before they passed. We can't just stand by and watch you make this choice." When I stayed silent, they exchanged glances. Resigned. You're so stubborn. Fine. Let's go to the brigade. I followed them quietly. The brigade issued us a certificate nullifying the engagement. In front of several elders, we exchanged the tokens given during our betrothal. Relieved, I helped the Liang elders back home. I knew they only wanted what was best for me. By all accounts, Leo was a prized match. Even his parents couldn't get why I insisted on ending the engagement. But I couldn't explain it to them. I couldn't tell them that, in my past life, I had suffered enough, that even the only child I had was given to Mia, making them a family while I lived alone. The engagement was officially off. The Liangs, always kind, said, "From now on, you're our daughter." I didn't mention I was heading northwest for school, but I stayed with the Liang elders for half a month before leaving. When it was time to go, Mr. Liang walked me all the way to the village entrance, endlessly reminding me to treat their home as my own and to visit often. It wasn't until I reached town to buy my ticket that I saw they'd slipped 200 yuan into my bag. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. When I returned to Leo's apartment, the first thing I did was mark 15 bold red X's on the calendar. Only 4 days left, just 4 more days. I was carrying my luggage to my room when I heard the door open. Leo had just come back from work, accompanied as usual by Mia and Nian Nian. "You're back," Leo said, sounding surprised. Mia gave me a polite nod before turning and walking straight into my room. I frowned as she casually shut the door behind her, leaving my stuff piled up messily in the living room. I glanced at Leo. He hesitated for a moment, then explained, "It's been raining heavy and Mia's place has a leaky roof. She'll stay here for 2 days since you weren't around and don't have much stuff. I let her use your room." "So you think it's cool to clear out my things and give my room to someone else without my permission?" I asked, keeping my tone chill. Leo paused, then added, "I moved your stuff into my room. You can stay with me for now." As he spoke, he opened the door to his room. "By the way, where are all your books? There's barely anything left here." I looked at the small bundle he'd set on the bedside table and pressed my lips together, letting it go. I replied indifferently, "The college entrance exams are done. No point keeping the books." So I sold them. Leo frowned. "Even after the exams, you might still need them later. Why sell them?" I stayed silent. After a moment, he changed the subject. "So, what did your family say?" I hesitated briefly, then replied, "They checked the dates, and the 9th isn't a good time. We'll have to discuss it later." This was the excuse I'd agreed on with the Liang elders to buy myself more time. Once I left in a few days, I'd explain everything to Leo. Leo didn't seem suspicious. He simply nodded and muttered, "Looks like I'll have to pick a new date." With that, he left the room, saying he'd make dinner, and I should rest. At the desk by the window, I noticed the marriage report Leo had been filling out. Only the date was left blank. My gaze lingered on it for a moment before I pulled myself together and got up to help. However, as I approached the kitchen, I overheard the faint sound of conversation outside. Leo's deep voice, Mia's playful tone, and Nian Nian's cheerful chatter. I silently returned to my seat. It was clear that staying here, even for a few more days, was no longer appropriate, especially sharing a room with Leo. But with only 4 days left, I had no time to find another place. After dinner, I decided I'd set up a makeshift bed in the living room. The day had been exhausting after a long journey, and I had hoped to crash early, but Mia, full of energy, had taken over the living room, dressed in a white dress. She was practicing dance moves, stretching her legs on a mat. Meanwhile, Nian Nian kept running in and out of Leo's room, even bouncing on his bed like it was a trampoline, making me feel suffocated. I grabbed a basin and went outside to fetch water. As soon as I stepped out, I took a deep breath. "Aru, you're back. Weren't you staying with your in-laws?" Mrs. Hua, the neighbor, greeted me, carrying her own basin as we headed toward the well together. "I went for a few days and just came back," I replied politely. Mrs. Hua, whose husband worked as an accountant at the mines, had a good life. She often shared homemade treats with me, and we had a friendly relationship. "I have to say, Mrs. Hua," she trailed off, glancing behind me before pulling me a few steps further away to the well. She tapped my forehead reproachfully. "You're too soft-hearted. That woman, her husband is gone, yet she's flaunting herself everywhere. Why would you let someone like her into your home? Leo's a catch, like honey attracting flies. And you're just inviting trouble right in." Her words were harsh, but I knew she meant well. That man even told people it was your idea to bring Mia and her daughter here because you felt sorry for them. Can you believe it? He's using you as a shield so others won't gossip behind his back. I smiled bitterly. Of course, Leo would say that. He wanted to avoid gossip at my expense, but with so little time left, I didn't want to waste energy arguing with him. Mrs. Hua sighed and insisted, "You need to get rid of her ASAP, and if you need help, just let me know. Don't be shy." Though I could sense her curiosity about the drama, I still appreciated her concern. When I returned to the apartment, the living room was finally empty. I grabbed some clothes and headed to the bathroom, only to find it crowded with unfamiliar women's toiletries. The towels and shampoo I normally used were shoved into a corner next to the trash can. In their place were Mia's things: 2 towels, shampoo, and a hairband. "Auntie, Nian Nian needs to use the bathroom. Can you move?" Mia brushed past me, deliberately bumping my shoulder. My head hit the doorframe. Mia was already crouched nearby, holding Nian Nian and helping her with her business. When she was done, she turned to me, still standing at the door, and said softly, "Sister-in-law, could you please move? You're blocking the way." Her voice was gentle, but the smugness and disdain in her eyes were unmistakable. I didn't budge. "Apologize," I said calmly. I held my ground. Mia froze, clearly not expecting me to stand firm. Nian Nian, ever the protective kid, rushed forward, gave me a hard shove, and began wailing. "You're bad, you bullied my mommy, you're a bad person." Leo came rushing out of his room upon hearing Nian Nian's cries. "What's going on here?" he asked, clearly alarmed. Mia's eyes brimmed with tears as she explained, "It's my fault. Nian Nian had to go urgently. And since sister-in-law was in the bathroom, I asked her to step aside. That's all." Leo glanced at me disapprovingly. Though he didn't say anything in front of Mia, he comforted Nian Nian with soft words. "Don't cry, don't cry. How about we ask Auntie to apologize?" When Nian Nian kept crying, Leo picked her up and carried her back to the room, promising her candy. Mia threw me a triumphant smirk before following them. I could hear Nian Nian's cries gradually subside from inside the room, without any expression. I finished washing up, carefully gathered my stuff into a basin, and went back to the room. By the time I returned, Mia and Nian Nian had left. A colorful box of candies sat on the nightstand, clearly meant for the kid. Leo noticed me tidying up and paused. "Let's talk," he said, his tone deliberate. Judging by his expression, I could already tell what was coming. He wanted to lecture me about being an adult, about not stooping to a child's level, and, without a doubt, to push me to apologize. I sat down without a word, took a piece of paper, and dabbed it against the small wound on my forehead, where I'd hit the doorframe. Then I held it out to him. The smear of blood was stark against the white paper. Leo's words caught in his throat. His face turned pale, then flushed. "I'll sleep in the living room tonight," I said, getting up and grabbing some bedding. "Wait," Leo said, grabbing my arm. "You can sleep in here." "Why are you going out there?" He assumed I was pissed about what just happened. With a sigh, he tried to explain, "Nian Nian is just a kid, and Mia didn't mean any harm. You're an adult. Don't hold grudges against a child. There are guests. I know you don't like Mia, but she's had a rough time. Don't be petty." I let out a cold laugh. "So you brought her back here and told everyone it was my idea to bring her?" "Right." Leo's breath hitched. He opened his mouth but said nothing. I shook my head, smiling bitterly. No matter how noble his excuses sounded, his true intentions couldn't be hidden. For the sake of the Liang elders and to keep his rep clean, I wouldn't confront him openly. But that didn't mean I could forgive or forget. That night, Leo ended up sleeping on the living room floor. The next morning, I packed up all my stuff, planning to find a hotel before returning for the rest of my luggage. When I opened the door, Leo had already made breakfast. Nian Nian spotted me immediately and let out a disdainful hum, pulling the food closer to herself and Mia. Leo, holding a plate of fried eggs, greeted me with a smile. "You're up. Come." I made fried eggs. He noticed the food hoarded on their side and awkwardly chuckled. "Nian Nian, be a good girl and share some with Auntie." "Okay." Ignoring all of them, I left the house. The only hotel nearby was just a street away. I booked the cheapest room for 3 days, paying 21 yuan in total, including a deposit. Afterwards, I grabbed some breakfast at a nearby stall, a bag of buns and fried dough sticks, before heading back to collect my luggage. As soon as I stepped inside, I saw that my carefully packed bundle had been opened. My stuff was scattered everywhere. On the table, Nian was folding my college acceptance letter into a paper airplane. "What are you doing?" I shouted, snatching the letter from her hands. Startled, Nian fell off the chair and began wailing at the top of her lungs. Mia came rushing out of the room. "What are you doing? Who gave you the right to bully Nian?" She yelled, shoving me aside and scooping the kid into her arms. My hands trembled with anger as I carefully unfolded the crumpled letter, making sure it wasn't damaged. "Bully her? Why don't you look at what she's done? Who told you to touch my things? Get out of here!" Mia stood up, holding Nian, and sneered, "You're not even married to Leo yet. This isn't your house to boss us around." She walked toward the door, but paused to add, "Even if you do marry him, you'll never win against me." The door slammed shut. Mia's hostility only showed when Leo wasn't around. In the past, I had been insecure and timid in the face of her beauty and talent. As a star performer in the art troupe, she had every advantage: looks, career, and charisma. I always thought I could never compete with her. But now, with a second chance, I realize, why should I even try? In Leo's heart, Mia was always the #1 priority. But aside from him, wasn't there more to my life? I could go to college, I could contribute to my country's development, I could see the world, broaden my horizons, and deepen my knowledge. This mess was only holding me back. After finishing my packing, I drew another bold X on the calendar. Then, I shouldered my bag and left for the hotel I'd booked. When I was first reborn, I thought about confronting Mia at her workplace. After all, she had ruined my last life. My anger was hard to contain. But what would come of it? As long as Leo stayed by her side, even if she lost her job, he'd back her up. For Mia, it wouldn't be much of a loss. And as long as I cared about repaying the Liang elders for their kindness, as long as I didn't want to completely destroy Leo, Mia would remain untouchable. The real issue, after all, was Leo himself. If his thoughts were straight, Mia wouldn't have any hold over him. There were so many of Leo's buddies from the army. Why wasn't anyone else acting as a godfather to Mia's kid? Exactly. At the hotel, I tidied up briefly and took out some stationery to write Leo a letter, setting aside his constant absence after we got married, setting aside his entanglement with Mia that lasted a lifetime. I thought back to the 3 years I spent in high school here. Leo had provided for my food and lodging, and even occasionally helped me with my studies. For that alone, I owed him an explanation. In the letter, I told him that I had already gone back to dissolve our engagement and had been accepted into a university elsewhere. From now on, our paths would diverge, and we'd never see each other again. Halfway through writing, there was a knock at the door. Thinking it was hotel staff, I opened it only to see Leo standing there, looking disheveled and like he'd been searching everywhere. The moment he saw me, he let out a heavy sigh of relief. "Finally, I found you, as long as you're safe. That's all that matters." I stayed silent, expecting him to scold me. "All right, don't be mad anymore. Come back with me," he said as he squeezed into the room, reaching for my stuff to help pack. I quickly pressed my half-written letter under a book, but his eyes caught a silver bracelet peeking out of my bag. His expression shifted as he picked it up. "Why is this bracelet here? Wasn't it with my mom?" I froze, cursing myself for not hiding it earlier. In the afternoon, when Nian had rummaged through my things, a small bell had fallen off, and I'd fixed it. This bracelet was the token from our childhood engagement, which I'd recently retrieved. Leo's face grew more perplexed. "Why do you have this bracelet? It should be with my mom." As I scrambled for an explanation, he suddenly chuckled. "I get it. My mom must have asked you to bring it to me." He placed the bracelet back into my bag and added casually, "Just keep it for now. We're getting married soon anyway." "So what's mine is yours." I relaxed slightly, but my hand still pressed firmly against my bag. Leo frowned. "Are you still upset? Nian was wrong, sure, but she's just a kid. Stop being so dramatic. Do you know how worried Mia was when you ran out? She even scraped her knees looking for you and is still resting at home." I stared at him coolly, and his words faltered. "You know," I began with a laugh, "this afternoon, your daughter was rummaging through my bag. When I told her to stop, your precious Mia said I had no right to tell her off. She even said that even if I married you, I wouldn't be able to compete with her." Leo's expression darkened. What? My daughter? She's just my goddaughter. I ignored him and continued. You use the excuse of taking care of a comrade's widow to get close to her. But if your late comrade knew how you've been taking care of his wife, do you think he'd rest in peace? My sharp words pierced through his self-deception. His face paled and he staggered slightly. After a long pause, he managed to say, Fine. If you're not coming back, stay here and reflect. I'll come back for you in a few days. With that, he turned and left in a hurry, muttering, I never wanted to wrong you. I'll go back and file the marriage report now. I shut the door with a blank expression. How ridiculous. In his eyes, agreeing to marry me was some grand favor I should be eternally grateful for. The next day, I went to my teacher to pick up my train ticket, worried I wouldn't get a seat. My teacher had gone out of their way to arrange everything for me and even contacted some acquaintances in the Northwest to look out for me. After sharing lunch with my teacher, I bought some local specialties as gifts for my future roommates. On the last night before leaving, I went to bed early. I thought I'd be restless, overwhelmed with emotions, but surprisingly, I fell asleep almost immediately. The next morning, I handed my letter for Leo to the hotel front desk, checked out, and headed to the train station with my luggage. The 2-day train ride was bumpy, and I could only catch bits of sleep here and there. When I finally arrived at the university, I felt a deep sense of relief. After completing the registration process, my days filled up with intense coursework, having never had the chance to attend college in my previous life. I cherished every moment this time, except for eating and sleeping. I spent all my time in class or at the library. 3 months into my studies, I received the first letter from Leo. I wasn't surprised he had found me. A month earlier, I had already heard from my teacher that he had been asking about my whereabouts. Leo Kim had gone to see my teacher, and he knew I was in the Northwest. So, when I received a letter from him, I wasn't shocked. In his letter, Leo said he didn't agree to dissolve our engagement. He wrote that, in his heart, I had always been his wife. He insisted there was nothing between him and Mia White and acknowledged that he knew I disliked her. He claimed he had already sent her away and would never see her again. He also said he would wait for me to return. Enclosed with the letter was 100 yuan. I tucked the letter away without replying and didn't touch the money. University coursework was demanding. While my grades were at the top of my class and I had received scholarships, my monthly living expenses still weighed heavily on me. I thought about finding a part-time job, but when my teacher heard about it, he scolded me and began sending me 50 yuan each month. In his letter, he made it clear the money was a loan. And at the end of the letter, he cheekily added, Don't worry, my wife knows about this and supports it wholeheartedly. For some reason, tears started streaming down my face. In my past life, I had felt despair, regret, and hatred, but I'd never shed tears. In this life, I had stayed composed as well, yet now the tears came freely. I cried uncontrollably, alarming my roommates, who quickly came over to comfort me. After that cry, I redoubled my efforts. Leo's letters arrived every month, always with 100 yuan enclosed. In the final month of the semester, his letter admitted that he didn't think I would ever come back. Still, he promised to visit me and spend the new year together. But Leo never came, and the letters abruptly stopped. Later, I learned from my teacher that Leo had married Mia White. My teacher wrote that the situation had been tumultuous. Leo had originally applied for a transfer to join me, but someone reported him for improper relationships. Since I was gone and unavailable as a witness, the case was suppressed. However, Mia lost her job because of the scandal, leaving Leo with no choice but to marry her. My teacher's words were heavy but sincere. In hindsight, I was incredibly lucky. I avoided what could have been a lifetime of misery. I knew I was fortunate. Lucky to have been reborn before my college applications, lucky to have dodged the quagmire of my previous life. A year later, I received another letter from Leo. The first line read, I'm sorry. He confessed that Mia herself had been the one to report him. When Leo wrote the transfer application to join me, Mia had begged him to stay, but he refused. Out of desperation, she took a drastic gamble and won by creating a scandal. She ensured they would have to marry. Leo admitted that he had only later realized the significance of the dates I had marked on the calendar in the living room. He had always assumed those were the days I looked forward to marrying him. I smiled bitterly as I burned all his letters. As for the money Leo had sent me, I returned every penny to my teacher, asking him to forward it back to Leo. 2 years later, before I graduated, I joined the National Infrastructure Project, Project 201. dedicating my life to my country. I gave my years to my homeland with no thought of return. The Understand is on So House for 3 days. During those 3 days, I realized how badly I had failed her. I had made a grave mistake not in waiting for her to grow up, but in letting my heart stray. In the countless times I had helped Mia White, my feelings had drifted away from the path they should have stayed on. Mia's kindness, Nian Nian's cheerfulness. They had distracted me from the fact that I already had a fiancé. I had done things I now felt ashamed of. After 3 days, I made up my mind I couldn't lose Aru. I went to the hotel to find her, but I was too late. She was gone. I asked everyone I could, but no one knew where she had gone. It was only through her teacher that I learned she had gone to the Northwest. The realization devastated me. I rushed home and saw the silver bracelet in her bag, the token of our childhood engagement. But by then, it was already too late. Her family confirmed that she had annulled the engagement. I returned to the apartment we had shared for 3 years, lost and broken. That night, I drank heavily. Mia snuck in and saw my transfer application. She caused a huge scene. In the aftermath, she lost her job, and her family came to confront me. In the end, I had no choice but to marry her. Afterward, my friends began to distance themselves from me. I wrote letters to Aru, but she never replied. It felt as though the moment she disappeared, she had vanished entirely from my world. Life with Mia became suffocating. She kept a tight leash on me, constantly picking fights. My parents disliked her, frequently comparing her to Aru. The stress turned Mia hysterical and neurotic. Several opportunities for transfers arose, but Mia sabotaged them every time, accusing me of wanting to leave her and chase after my former fiancé. Each time, I could only laugh bitterly to myself. By now, Aru probably found the mere thought of me revolting, while Mia clung to me tightly. In Aru's eyes, I was worth nothing. As time went on, I watched my friends climb the ranks while I remained stuck. Mia began berating me, calling me useless. She wanted another child, but we could never conceive again. In the end, we only had Nian Nian. When Nian Nian grew up, she married and had children. But she didn't marry well. Her husband was abusive, unfaithful, and a gambler. Mia spent her days crying over Nian Nian's situation. Yet when Nian Nian wanted a divorce, Mia adamantly opposed it. Every argument ended the same way. Mia would take her frustrations out on me, blaming me for everything. "You're useless. Why did I ever marry you?" Even Nian Nian resented me, accusing me of not having a high enough position to protect her. I had no response. Later, Nian Nian tried to escape her abusive husband after failing to get a divorce, only to be caught and beaten severely. By then, I was old and powerless to help her. Eventually, Nian Nian took her own life, leaving behind a 6-year-old child. I never imagined that in my old age, after losing my daughter, I would have to raise her child. Looking at Nian Nian's son, I was suddenly reminded of years past. A fleeting memory emerged of a youthful figure beside me, her eyes full of me and only me. I couldn't help but wonder, what if I had never involved myself with Mia White? What if I had married Aru instead? Would things have turned out differently? But when had I lost her? I couldn't even remember. As I reflected on my life, I realized just how utterly meaningless it had all been.